Hey guys, welcome back to another video. In today's video, we're going to review how to set up a print server. In doing this, we're going to go over specifically how to set your permissions, how to set your access, how to set the controls up correctly so that way you could deploy printers to users who don't have admin access on their desktops, how to circumvent the print nightmare, but still keep the security on the actual print server. We'll go through all these steps together here in just a few here. So I'd like to start off with, once you log into your server, you don't actually have to install any additional functions. So on 2012 R2 and newer, this should be pre-installed anyway. And a lot of people think that setting up printers means just setting them up to share the printers, like install the printers locally on the actual server and then share them off the server. That's not the case, not in at least 2016, 19, 22 server. In order to do this correctly, we'll click on Start. We'll go to Administrative Tools, or Windows Administrative Tools. We'll go to Print Management, right-click on it, and pin it to the actual Start menu. Since this is going to be your print server, you'll want to have access to this. Once you do that, click on the Print Management, and you will open the print server itself. And generally, when you open it, it should have the view just like you see here. We'll expand print servers, and we'll expand the print server itself, and then we'll expand printers. Now, I already pre-installed 2 printers on this system. These are fake printers that don't go anywhere, and the reason I did it beforehand is because it's very slow if there's not actually a printer there. But at any rate, once you get into this location where you see printers, you'll right-click on printers and you'll choose Add Printer. Then you're going to want to use a TCP connection, so you'll click Next. You'll put your IP address of your printer in, and then you'll put your port name. Now, your port name could just be the IP address, or it could be the name of the printer. I would actually suggest you use the name of the printer versus the IP address, because typically what happens is over time you'll replace the printers before you replace the server. And if you replace the printers, you can't reuse the same port with the same IP address. So it'll add an _1 and an _2 and so on and so forth throughout the print server port configuration. And when somebody like myself or any other technician or engineer goes in there, it gets confusing as to what the live actual port name is versus what the actual IP is. So you'll put your information in there. Now, you could choose the auto detect to find the printer driver. However, I would suggest not doing that. I would suggest going to the manufacturer's website and downloading the PCL 6 driver or the PostScript driver, depending on what you actually need. And the reason why will become clear here in a few minutes, but once you go through this process and you got the printer installed, you'll see the printers listed in your list here. Now, you'll see the driver versions as to whatever driver you installed, the driver type, whether it's a type 4 or type 3, and then you'll see the queue status as ready, as well as jobs in queue. If you have jobs in queue already, that means somebody's trying to print to a printer that probably previously existed, and you'll want to clean out those ports first. Those ports will be listed under ports here. So we have the fake printer here. We can see it. Fake printing, fake printer, account printer. If we drill down into these ports and do configure port, we could actually see the IP address of the print port here. If we go back into printers, we can see the printers. The next thing you're going to want to go to is the actual drivers tab here, and you're going to want to check to make sure it says package true. It's very important that it says package true. If it doesn't say package true, that means that users cannot install these print drivers. That means the print drivers are not signed. If they're unsigned print drivers, Windows will not allow non-administrators to install the printers on the local desktops. So now that we have this configured, what we're going to do is we're going to take a look first to make sure we don't have them set and deployed. And if you go in here, we'll see per user GPO or per machine GPO, and we have nothing deployed. Now we're going to go over to the domain controller and set up our security groups and start to set up our group policy configurations for our deployment of our printers. Okay guys, so now we're in the domain controller, specifically in Active Directory users and computers. And if we drill down into the OUs we created earlier in our administrative and non-administrative, we're going to choose groups under both. And we're going to, under the administrative groups, we're going to create print admins. So I created the accounting print admins and the company print admins. And then we're going to create print auditors. So we did accounting print audit and company print audit. And then we're also going to go down here under groups under the non-administrative. This is where your delegated desktop admins would have access. And we're going to go to printer access. You'll have accounting print users and you'll have company print users. Now, what you're going to want to do is you're going to have to add the users that you want into each one of these groups. So specifically, your print admins, these are the people that are going to have the ability to change whether or not you have duplex, whether or not you use color, whether or not, what type of paper you feed or roll, how to configure the page layout, how things look when it's printed, the quality, the print job. Those are people that usually are going to be in the office, probably office administrators. Those should be your print admins. Those are the people that work with the office, know specifically how these print jobs should look. This is not something that tech or IT should be involved in. You should set these up, give these people access to the printers and allow them to modify and change that. Sometimes that'll require you to have remote server administrative tools installed on the desktop and then specifically just the option for the print operators. Or you could give them access to the server through remote desktop services, but then set up delegated access controls with a separate account so that way they only have that to change the settings. But this is something that you'll want to talk to the company about and allow them to decide specifically what they want to do. If you're going to do this, then I would suggest that you set up some kind of a maintenance fee to do this, because if it's changed 14 times during the day, it can become a little crazy. Now, the additional option is that once you have this set up and once you have them set up as admins, they can go into the print properties on their desktop and make the changes by bullet point, which will set the defaults on the actual printer. That's also an option. So that's what a print admin is. Now, as far as print audit is concerned, your print auditors are the people that basically everybody that prints to a specific system. So if you have 40 people that are in your accounting department, then all those 40 people should be in this security group. And the reason why is because that way when they print their accounting details, a log is created as to what was printed by which user from what machine and at what time. So that way in the event that you ever have a leak of data, you could trace that data back to an event log that's actually in your system. And that's part of the security as well as the compliance side. This is an option. This is not necessary for you to do, but it is best practice if you want a paper trail as to what's actually going on. Now, I know that there's third-party companies out there that like Paperport that provide the same service, but this is free, so keep that in mind when you're setting these things up. Now what we're going to do is we're going to go down here to printer access and accounting printer users and company printing users. So this is where you would add your full amount of users. So everybody that's going to print to a specific printer gets added to these groups. And the reason why is because you don't want people having access to like micro printing. So if you're printing checks, you don't want somebody from a different department having the ability to access your check printing. So that's when you would add these users specifically to these security groups. Now, again, it's possible to do this without adding anybody to any security groups and giving everybody full reign. And that is 100% up to you as to whether or not you want to set it up that way. But keep in mind, if you do that, you don't have an audit log. You don't have a trace. So if somebody says, oh, every time I print this, it keeps jamming, you would have no way to prove that. You would have to take their word for it. And in IT, we all know that people have a tendency, not that I like to say this, but people have a tendency of embellishing what actually is taking place, or they are unable to actually explain it. So at minimum, I would suggest setting up at least the audit configuration so that way you have a paper trail. But again, this is all optional and all up to you. Okay, so welcome to the group policy portion. So the group policy portion requires 2 different policies or more depending on how you want to configure it. But what we'll start with is just the security setup. So right-click on your group policy objects and choose New. And we're going to call this _ printer security config 2024 and click OK. Next thing we're going to want to do is we're going to want to find that printer policy that we just created and right click on it to GPO status and disable the user configuration. Then we're going to right click on it again. We're going to choose edit. Okay, so now that we're in the editor, the easiest way to get to these printer configuration or security configuration is just to go to the computer configuration, to policies, to administrative templates, and then printers. Now on the right hand side, you're going to have a series of configuration options that are available. And those configuration options are going to be what you're going to set for your security of your print services. This gives your users the ability to actually install drivers, users the ability to install the printers, or printers to install automatically through the policy configuration. So what we're going to do is we're going to arrange the names or the settings by name, so that way we can easily find things. And the first thing we're going to do is we're going to locate the limit print driver installation to administrators. We're going to double click on this and we're going to choose disable. And what this is going to do is it's going to allow users to install the printer drivers that we have currently set for true for the access controls for the driver itself. So again, make sure the driver is signed. Once the driver is signed, if you set this to disabled, that driver will automatically install on your client. Now, this is the way you circumvent the print nightmare configuration. But keep in mind that you still want the security in place for your print nightmare configuration. So that's why the next thing we're going to do is we're going to set the print option to always render the print job on the server. And we're going to choose enable. That way, they can't run the print services from their desktop. They run them from the server. Now, keep in mind, if you have like thousands of print jobs going on at one time, you want to set this anyway, even if you don't circumvent the print nightmare thing. And the reason why is because it'll change how the queue loads and allows you to print jobs. So if you have it's set to user to allow them to render it on their machine, it'll render the print job before it sends it to the server, which will save processor and memory utilization on the server. But it'll also cause the queue to fill in most cases, and because the print services themselves are 32-bit, they've never really been updated to the 64. So the print spooler itself is a 32-bit application, but it runs 64-bit drivers off your desktop. It's a little convoluted, but with that said, I would suggest making sure all the print jobs render on the server, not on the client machine, because of the way the queue works. You can end up with situations where somebody that's printing one page ends up waiting until 150 pages get printed before they have the access to the printer. If they use the render job and they both hit the server at the same time, it'll actually use the shorter print job versus the longer one, because the amount of time it'll take to actually render the print job. All right, so that said, now the next thing we're going to do is we're going to need to enable the point and print restrictions. So if we look in here, we should find point and print restrictions. So we find them there. We'll double click on this and we'll choose enable. We want to click the box that says users can only point and print from these servers. And now you're going to want to add your print server name in here. It should be your fully qualified domain name. So for this one, we have ytd file 01.ytd.local. Now, if you have multiple forests, you could choose the checkbox to only allow users in a specific forest. So if you have trust set up and you only want one set of users to access one set of print servers, that's what you would do. If you have multiple print servers, you would add a colon and then add your additional print server name in here, and you could go on and so forth for as many as you want. Once you have that set, we're going to go down here where it says installing drivers for a new connection. Do not show the warnings or elevation prompts. Do not show the warnings or elevation prompts for the updating drivers for an existing connection. And then we're going to click apply and then OK. So that sets the point and print restrictions, and that enables us to disable the limit printer installation to administrator, but still dictate specifically where drivers are allowed to be installed from. So this allows us to still meet the standard or the requirement for the print nightmare patch without having the annoyance of not allowing users to install the printers that are available on the infrastructure. Now keep in mind, if you do this and they have USB printers plugged in, you'll need to define specifically what USB printers are allowed, because if not, it'll cause the drivers to not work. So this only works on a situation where you have network printers only. If you have USB-based printers, what you'll need to do is you'll need to allow specific printers to either be published from the server, so you could install those drivers on the actual server and then set up a map directly to the desktop to allow the point and print to the desktop. So in other words, the desktop becomes the server. Or what you could do is you could add the additional option to list the approved USB connected printing devices here, where you could enable this and then add the print values in here separated by the /. So that's how you would set up the USB along with the point and print packages and the print nightmare patches. So once we have that set, what we're going to do now is we're going to create the package point and print approved servers. So if we look in here and we find the package point and print approved servers and we enable this, and we do show, and this again is your fully qualified name for your print server. So ytd file 01.ytd.local, and then OK. And you could add as many as you want. So I mean, like, you'd add another line and another line and so on and so forth. Once you do that, we're going to hit apply. And OK. So now we have the package point and print approved servers enabled as well. And now the last thing we're going to do in here is we are going to dip back and create the additional group policy objects for the printer deployment. So what we'll do is we'll close out of here. We'll go back over here. We'll check our print configuration. So we'll go to settings and we'll show our settings configurations, and we can see our configurations in here that we just set. Now what we're going to do next is we're going to create 2 blank policies. Now you have a choice at this point whether or not you want to create your policies as users or computer policies. And what I'm going to suggest that you do is you create them as computer policies if the printer is accessed by everyone, or if the users all have dedicated desktops. You're going to choose the user policy if you're using like a person that roams around the office that sits at different seats during different days, and you want him to or her to have a specific set of printers. Then you want to use a user policy. You also want to use a user policy in the event that you have like a check printer or a micro printer where only specific users should have access to it. Then you want to use a user-based policy because you don't want another person sitting at the desk at another time and printing checks. So that is how you would decipher which printers you want. Now, keep in mind, if you run like terminal services, remote desktop services, use the computer policy, don't use the user policy, unless, again, you have users using RDS or published applications that specifically need access to like micro printers or check printers. So what we're going to do is we're going to create 2 new policies. One we're going to call company printer, and the other one we're going to call accounting printer. And we're going to choose OK. Now we're going to do refresh. All right, so now we have the 2 policies created that we'll use to deploy our printers. So let's go back over to our file server, or hyphen, our print server in this instance. Okay guys, so we're back on the print server now at this point. So what we're going to want to do is you're going to want to actually click on the print servers on your print server and then go to printers and locate one of your printers that you have installed. For this we'll do fake company printer. So I'll right click on this bad boy and we'll choose properties. We're specifically looking for the security tab. So we're going to click on the security tab and we're going to click on advanced. Now the first thing you want to do is you're going to remove everyone. We've gone over this in previous videos, but everyone group gives access to the printer to access the printer basically to everyone. And what that means is somebody could show up in a parking lot and still print to your printer. And with the issues with like security with Print Nightmare and everything else that exists, realistically you don't want that. So if you need everybody in the company, regardless of the security group, to print, change it to authenticated user. And then apply and close, give it the same permissions as just print. So we're going to remove that. Then we're going to go to add. And what we're going to do first is we're going to add the permissions for the administrator, the security group that we created. Now keep in mind that we're going to want to mimic somewhat the manage this printer, manage the documents. So you'll manage printer, manage documents for the admin, because you want to give the admin the same access as the local administrator to the printer. But you don't want to give this group administrative access to your actual server. So in order to do that, what we'll do is we'll do select principal, and we'll choose company, print, admin, check names, okay? And we're going to do give this particular administrator the ability to manage this printer, print, and manage the document. Now keep in mind that you could give them print access, but if you give them manage access and you try to unselect print, it will unselect manage this printer. Now the reason why that happens is because you can't manage the printer without the ability to print to the printer. So once this is done, what we'll do is we'll just hit OK. So there we go, we have full control for that particular group to this printer. So now that person or people who have access in this way, in admin access into this printer, have the ability to change all the variables, the pages, the paper, the color, everything that has to do with the actual printer itself. the next thing we're going to do is we're going to add the ability to print to this printer. So what we want to do is we want to add the delegated users we created under our non-administrative security groups, or our company print users. So we're going to select principal, and we're going to choose company print user and click OK. And we're going to just simply give them print, and then we're going to click OK. So now we have our admins that have administrative access. They can do whatever. And then we have our users, which are just going to be the people that are going to print to the actual printer. So what we're missing at this point is we're missing the ability to do audits. So what we're going to do is we're going to go to auditing, and we're going to choose to add an audit, and we're going to audit based off of just print. Now keep in mind, if we wanted to audit like the admins to see if they're changing it to increasing color or causing bigger vast money changes, or if they're in there using admin access to give people access to print checks where they're doing theft, then you could modify this to actually see different variables. But for the sake of this, and because all that compliance requires us to do is to audit based off of the actual print job, we're just going to add the audit group into here. So we're going to add company print audit. Check name, click OK, print, and then OK, and then OK. All right, so now we have our permissions set to print to this particular printer. If we go over to the sharing and we go to additional drivers, in here we can add additional drivers if you have like x86 machines out there, if you have stuff that requires an ARM processor, just make sure you have the drivers installed, and then you could select the additional drivers to install. If you want to list this in the directory, you could do that too. Honestly, I tend to not do that because I use group policy to deploy everything, so there's really no reason to do that. I'm not really giving users the ability to install their own printers, so it doesn't matter. So once that's done, we'll click OK. I'm not going to do both of these things, but you get the idea as to how to do them on each one of the printers. You'll have to go through and add the stuff. And then you'll have to jump back into Active Directory and add your users if you already didn't do that. But now say we have this configured and we want to deploy these printers. Okay, so what we want to do is we want to actually go and we want to right-click on the fake company printer because that's the one we created. That's the one we have our permissions set for, and we're going to deploy this with group policy. And in order to do that, we just right-click on it and choose to deploy with group policy. We'll see the actual print share name here. We're going to want to go into the group policy name. Now, if you know this whole path out of the back of your head because you've done this now multiple times, then obviously you can add it. But if not, you just click on Browse. Then you'll click on All, so it shows you all the policies that we created. And then we're going to look for specifically company printer, and we're going to choose OK. And now we want to deploy this as a computer policy to all people. So everybody that accesses this printer is going to get a computer-based policy. And then we're going to choose Add. And that's how we set this up now. So if I click Apply, it'll tell us that it's been deployed or removed successfully, and we'll click OK, and then we'll click OK. And if we go into deployed printers, there we go. We see it. Fake company printer is deployed from this server, and it's per machine GPO. So it's going to install on them. Now, if you use a user policy, that means that in order for that printer to install, they have to reboot their machine before it'll actually show up. If you use a computer policy, then that policy will exist as soon as they log into the system. It'll exist if they're already logged into the system too. It will try to install the printer. Obviously, there's caveats to this, which is like if you don't have the correct drivers or you turned UAC off on the actual client machine and you don't have all the other pre-configuration done that we have on the rest of this stuff, it may not work right because UAC is required in order for these print services to work right. So deployments require UAC on. At this day and age, hopefully that's the case, because if it's not the case, then I would really question your IT services. But anyway, I digress. All right, so now that we have the policy deployed, what we're going to do is we're going to dip back over to our domain controller. And on the domain controller, we're going to now deploy our group policy, so that way the printer gets installed on the client machine or on the desktop, as well as the security configurations get deployed on the machines, which is super important in order for this to work correctly. Okay, so back on the domain controller. What we're going to do now is we're going to look specifically in the group policy manager. So if you're not in group policy management, just open it up and expand your group policy objects and look for the name of the policy you created for your printer. So for me, it was just company printer. And if we look on the right, we'll see that now we have our configuration done. The printer's been added That's the path for the printer. So we now have the ability to deploy this printer as a computer configuration. Keep in mind that since we have this computer configuration, we're not going to use the user configuration. Just right click on this bad boy, go to group policy status, and disable the user configuration. That way you keep everything uniform and clean. So we have our policy here, we have our deployment set. So now how do we get this particular printer installed on our clients? So we know it's not a user-based policy, it's a computer-based policy. So if we drill down into our OU that we created, and we go to our non-administrative, and we go to our computers, and we want to install this on everybody, all we got to do is just link an existing group policy, locate our company printer, and choose OK. But what if you only want to install this printer on specific machines, like say Windows 10 or Windows 8 or Windows 11, whatever it is? This is where the WMIs would come into play. So if you want this printer to only be installed on certain machines, we could go into the policy itself and we could change the WMI filter to just install it on Windows 10 machines, or specifically just Windows 11 machines. So this is how you would split this if you have multiple drivers you need to do. So if you need to deploy drivers for both Windows 10 and 11, and they are completely different drivers, which tends to take place on devices like Ricoh. But then that's why there's the name Reek in the beginning of their actual brand name. Haha. Anyway, so the printer deployment, now that we have that set, we're actually deploying it to everything. The question now is, what if we have users that we don't want this to deploy to? Well, since we set up our security groups, what we would do in here is we'd actually remove the security group from our company printer. You're going to get an angry notification. You're going to click OK anyway. And we're going to go in here and we're going to add the particular group that we created for the company printer. So I believe it was just company printers users. So we're going to just check that. Company printer users. Click OK. Click OK. And we could also add company printer admin. And then add that. So now our security configuration is allowed to allow the company print admins and company print users to get the printers installed on their machines. Again, if you wanted to, you could do 10 or 11, and it may become necessary on certain print manufacturers. Again, like Xerox, HP, they tend to use universal print drivers and allow you to print on multiple machines, whether it's like Windows 7 all the way to Windows 10 or 11, and it works fine. But then you have some manufacturers like Epson or Canon or Ricoh, and more so Ricoh than anything, that they use manufacturer drivers that vary from system to system, and mostly Ricoh. And the reason why Ricoh is because Ricoh is not an actual manufacturer. They rebrand things like Panasonic and Hitachi, so you end up with devices that are made by other companies that have different brand names on them, and as a result you have to have the driver specifically to it. So that's something that you definitely want to keep an eye on as to what drivers you're using during this process, especially if this fails to actually deploy the printers. But just because we have the printer deployed doesn't mean this is going to work. So what we're going to have to do now is we created a security group here. And the printer security configuration for 2024 is going to be used specifically for our client machines. So generally speaking, what I would do is I would actually create another WMI filter and set it directly for your client configuration. And if you look through our previous videos, you'll find the WMI configuration in our original Active Directory setup. And in the description is all the links for all the different variables as far as what the WMI is for a client-based system deployment. But what you'll do is you'll add that deployment to this, so that way you don't apply this policy to the servers, because you don't want to have the servers limited, and you don't want to force the file server to only have itself to look for drivers, because you'll cause issues with updates unless you have disabled your updates to include drivers, which is honestly is best practice, and just to manually install the drivers. But again, that's another video. So now that we have this configured and we added our printer configuration and our printer securities, at this point what will happen is on the client machine will get a group policy update, and the group policy update takes place every 15 minutes if it's the default. The printer will auto install on the client machine, And the client will not get a notification or anything because we disabled the UAC prompts. The UAC won't enable it. The only time it will fail is if the user who's logged into the system doesn't have access to signed drivers, or you have UAC disabled on the client machine, or the machine is way back in updates. So if it's like running on like 1909 still, but the driver revision is for 22H2 and Windows 11, it's not going to apply. So keep that in mind. Otherwise, at this point, this is the configuration, and it should be done, and you should work. If you have any problems, please enter a comment down below and let me know what the errors are that you're getting, and we can walk through that. If not, like and subscribe. It really helps me out. I'd like to keep these videos rolling. All right, guys, take it easy.